Welcome back to Norwood Primetime. And with me now are two of the people who worked behind the scenes with Ruth Lyons on...
And in front.
Right, exactly. And these are, from my left, Mr. Ron Wilson and Mr. Bill Gustin. Let's welcome them. Bill, you were the director of the Ruth Lyons show. Now, what was it like directing Ruth Lyons?
Well, I think I took over in '64, somewhere around in there, and Ruth called me into the office on a Friday, and she said, the program's in terrible shape, and it needs to get straightened out, and she said, I'm counting on you to come in and save it. Come into my office Monday and tell me what changes you want to make. And I went in Monday, and she said, what kind of changes do you think we ought to make? And I said, well, we really don't need a piano player. A good accordion player will be fine. Get rid of the rest of the band. The soprano singers, I was gone Tuesday.
You know, really, Ruth, Ron, you worked with Ruth as a director, but you also, she talks about you in her book. She had affection for you, great affection for you, and she...
Well, and I do for her. There are three distinct things I remember. You're referring to the story in the book, and I'll mention that. But I owe my career as a director to her because she gave me the first chance, and I think that was one of the wonderful things about her. She gave people opportunities to show what they could do and to develop their skills. And then I also met my wife through her because my wife was her secretary at that particular time. And that's a wonderful story also about our first date. Did you ever hear that story about our first date? You got time? You aren't going anyplace, are you? I was an elevator operator at WLW at the time. And the first day I met my wife, she came in to apply for a job, and I took her down to the personnel office on the elevator, and I took her up to Ruth Lyons' office. And you know, she was a country girl from northern Kentucky area. And so I sort of had an attraction. I kept asking her to go out with me, and she never would go out. And part of the reason she said was because she lived so far away, about 40 miles south, that she didn't want me to have to travel all the way down there and back up. So one day I was still running the elevator, and Miss Lyons got on the elevator, and I said, I'm really having a tough time getting to first base with your new secretary. She says, what do you mean? I explained the story to her. So that day, she calls me in on the air, and she says, tell me about the problem you're having with Jean. Well, then she calls Jean in. Now, you have to understand, you know, this is very shy. She's not used to the big show business. She calls her in on the air, and she says flat out to her, why won't you go out with him? And she says, well, I live so far away, and I didn't want him to have to drive 40 miles, you know, late at night, but that's the only reason. So then Leela Cook, who was another one of the people who work in the office, volunteered to put her up for the weekend so she wouldn't have to, you know, I wouldn't have to drive all that distance. So then we decided, where are we going to go on the date? So at that time, you folks remember Cinerama when it used to be downtown, the old Keith's Theater? Okay, I decided we're going to go to Cinerama. So I went to Cinerama. I think Don Wirtz was the manager then. I go to buy the tickets. Now, if you probably can't remember this, but Cinerama had an aisle down the middle of the theater, and all of the seats to the left of the aisle were odd numbered, and all of the seats to the right of the aisle were even numbered. So I get the tickets, and I still remember these to this day. Seats H101 and H103 were the seat numbers. So they're right next to each other, but it looks like there should be a 102 in the middle. So a day or so later, Miss Lyons calls me in on the show again. She says, well, did you get the tickets? And I said, yeah, I got the tickets. It's great. I said, there's only one problem. She says, what's that? I said, well, there's somebody that has a seat in between us. She says, I don't believe that. And I pulled out the tickets, and I said, look, H101, H103. And she says, you're right. She said, well, maybe you can trade with the person that has seat H102. So we get to the theater that night, and at intermission, Don Wirtz comes down. He's dressed in a tuxedo and everything. And he's got this little doll that they're using to promote the next Cinerama, and he says, this is for the young lady. And so Jean was, you know, kind of a little embarrassed. But it turned out that his wife and the three projectionist wives had been watching the show that day, and they wrote down the seat numbers. So he came down and gave us that doll. So from then on, whenever Jean and I went out, Ruth would ask me where we're going. I said, well, we're going to the hockey game, but my seats are on this side of Cincinnati Garden, and her seat is on that. So it later developed, and we married, and...
So you did marry this gal?
Sure did. Very, very happily married. We had our wedding down in Kentucky near her home, and Marion was kind enough to come and sing at our wedding, and in the middle of it, she kicked the plug out of the organ.
Bill, let me ask you something for just a second. You know, when you're working with Ruth Lyons, You throw away the format, don't you?
Well, basically, working with her is not a good phrase to use. Working for her was a better thing.
She was the boss.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
No doubt of it.
Now, was there ever a time when you would sit down with Ruth and you'd say, okay, now, Ruth, now we're going to do this, we're going to open up with this?
Occasionally, she would say, here's the way it's going to go. I wrote it down here.
So what did you do, get coffee or what?
Well, you couldn't even get next to Ruth. Ruth was, would arrive maybe 20 minutes before we hit the air. And she'd go directly into her office, and Marion and Ruby and all those people, and Cliff would be in and out, and they'd all be talking to her, and I'd be standing in the back. I would like to ask a question. What do you want?
You're only the director.
Well, Frigidaire called and said they want to use the gold Frigidaire instead of the white one. I don't care what they want.
So he was only the director of the show, you know. Now, these guys are both with WCET, and they worked with Ruth for years. There's another fellow you guys worked with, and still do.
At the time we're taping the show is why he can't be here. He's at work tonight.
He's at work at WCET tonight. His name is Gene Walz, and he was Ruth's first television director. And we've got a very brief videotape. He's got a cute story to tell, so if you're ready up in the booth upstairs, we'll run that tape.
Well, as Tennessee Ernie would say, I was as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs when Ruth picked me as her first TV director. And that was for 3 reasons. First, I was the first guy from the crew to become a director in WLW in decades. Second, I was the youngest director. And third, she was the hottest talent in town on radio. Management wanted her to be a big hit on TV, so the show had better be good. But she was always honest with me and had a great sense of humor. She was the type that when she goofed, she took the responsibility. She liked things off the cuff and avoided rehearsals and liked to tease the crew when something went wrong. We used to get back her, though, about the only way we could, through signs we'd put at the end of the program. The signs would say something like, Miss Lyons' dresses are from Omar the Tent Maker, because she was always on a diet. Or, she has an hourglass figure, but the sands of time have shifted. Even off the air, we tried to get even with her for a ribbing of the crew. Once, I remember she was downtown at the beauty parlor and called for someone to pick her up. I answered the phone, so I got her car and went down to get her. She looked great, and a few women were staring at her as she came out. I couldn't resist, though, so I ran around, opened the car door, and said very loud, "What's the matter, Mom? Couldn't they take you?" This broke her up. She started laughing so hard she could hardly get into the car. Mom came from the fact we used to call her Mother Lyons. All she used to say when you went to her office, you were going to the Lion's Den. I was her director for more than 4 years, and they were fun years. She made a lot of people happy at Christmas, and many, many, many more children happy with the Ruth Lyons Christmas Fund. It would be very nice if all her Christmases were as happy as she gave to others.
Thank you, Gene. Just one other quick question, guys. What, in a nutshell, what did you learned a lot from Ruth Lyons, no doubt?
I think everything. She got us all started. She encouraged us. She was the brightest gal I ever worked with.
Ron, did she know that people would look back some 20, 30, 40 years later and call her a legend, or was she just doing it and just thinking she's doing her job?
That's a tough one to answer, but she was doing her job. She was just thoroughly professional person, and you understood going in that it was her show. But even in spite of that, she encouraged you to be creative and to add elements to the show. But once you did that, you understood, exactly about how far you could go without, stepping over that very fine line. But a fantastic woman, absolutely.
Well, we want to thank both of you for giving us a real special insight. These guys were great, weren't they? Let's give them a hand. Now, what I'd like to do at this time is introduce our next guest, who is one heck of a singer. I know you're going to agree with me. She is the queen of singing here in Cincinnati. Ruby Wright, ladies and gentlemen.
birthday time, the birthday of a baby. All little children seem to know it. Even a heart no longer young will show it. Christmas with its carols gay sets the whole world singing. Life has a lovely way of living when it's Christmas time. Lighted candles shining from each window like gold on the snow. Birthday candles with a wondrous story, first told long ago. For Christmas makes each dream come true. Like children, just remember that nothing's impossible at Christmas time. Lighted candles shining from each window like gold on the snow. Birthday candles with a wondrous story, first told long ago. For Christmas makes each dream come true. Like children, just remember that nothing's impossible at Christmas time.
Ruby Wright, everybody.
Thank you very much.